Training camps are just around the corner, but we still have several mysteries that need to be solved. Peter and I are joined today by Zain Dhanani, who is going to break down some of those mysteries, including where Stefon Diggs and Deebo Samuel might land, who could be the wide receiver one in this Jacksonville wide receiver room, and much more. Welcome in, everyone, to the Fantasy Live Show. So happy to have you back here with us. Today, we are breaking down the biggest mysteries going into training camp. I was told it's not spooky, so I was going to do a whole ghost thing, and I just didn't do it. So it's more like Scooby-Doo trying to find the clues. Kendall, Valenzuela, Peter, Overzet, and I am so excited to introduce Zain Dhanani. First time with us, Pete. I know you've done some stuff with Dwayne McFarland already, but Zain, we are so excited to have you here with us. How you doing?
I'm pumped up. And, you know, the theme and everything, Scooby-Doo was my favorite cartoon growing up. And you know what? I will admit that I still watch it sometimes.
There we go. So. We're locked in, Pete. You ready? Scooby-Doo? Is that like, I think that's the vibe that our producers wanted us to go for. Mystery.
Well, here's the thing in fantasy these days. It used to be just you have someone that gives you rankings, but we're now in an era where you need a doctor on hand. You need a lawyer on hand. And today we need a detective to help us sift through all of these clues. And there's no detective I would want more in my corner right now than Mr. Zain. So I think we are well equipped, Kendall, to solve the mystery at hand.
Wow, look at us. We are just rolling into it. So Zain, we are super excited to have you on because we do have a ton of training camp mysteries here, and that's really what we're diving into, presented by him. So let's get right into it and talk about some guys that actually it's a mystery if they're even going to be, if we're going to see them on our screens in the NFL in 2026 here, Zain. When we look at guys like Diggs and Deebo, Stefon Diggs and Deebo Samuel, what are the best and most realistic outcomes for where they could land?
Yeah, so if I'm looking in that crystal ball and really looking to solve that mystery, Stefon Diggs, okay, we'll start with him. All the news for him right now, from Adam Schefter to Jeremy Fowler to Ian Rappaport, and then even the Commanders beat writers, we're talking about John Keim and Ben Standig. All of them are basically pointing to, hey, the Commanders are interested in adding a wide receiver to this rotation. So the big thing here is that he's one of those guys that I think can really, really kind of step into a big role for the Commanders offense. We know that they're wanting to run more 12 and 13 personnel, which means there's 2 or 3 tight ends on the field. And he's one of those guys that really makes this wide receiver 2 room kind of complete, right? Because for all intents and purposes, everything they've talked about is, hey, we're going to have a wide receiver by committee at this point in time. And we've seen how that's worked out for different teams in the past. So Diggs has really been linked to that Commanders situation. And then he's also working out in Maryland, which is actually very close to both the Washington Commanders practice facility. And then it's also very close to another team, the Ravens. The Ravens are another team that are interested in potentially having his services. Notably, their wide receiver 2 right now being Rashad Bateman. And then wide receiver 3 also being a mystery between Devontae Walker, Elijah Surratt, Jacoby Lane. So there's another opportunity for him to potentially come into that receiver room and potentially provide strong value there as well. From a fantasy angle, I personally love it more for the Commanders. I don't know what you guys are thinking, but that's kind of the situation where I see, hey, this guy has the most upside to bring to that room more than anything else.
And I think the role he'd fit is exactly what they're missing, right? You have Terry McLaurin as the downfield threat. You have some of these younger players, obviously the rookie Antonio Williams. I guess Luke McCaffrey, they were kind of hoping to be the slot guy, but I just don't think that's panning out at this point. Like, him replacing the Deebo Samuel role, being that slot guy and being more of a reliable target earner for Jayden Daniels. It just makes too much sense. And it also made sense why they were kind of interested in Ayuk initially, because I think he could have done some of that. We know that's now off the table. You don't have to be a detective to know that one. So, man, everything lines up. I guess, Dwayne, Zain, I would ask you, do you think he cares most about money? Do you think he cares about chasing a ring, or can he triangulate it all here with the Commanders?
Yeah, so everything that I've read and listened to basically points to him getting a contract somewhere in that $8 to $12 million range, which is not like the full range that you'd see for a guy that's as talented as a guy like Stefon Diggs. He still had 1,000 yards last year. He didn't even play more than 60% route share for half the games that he played in last year. So
Yeah.
I think there's still meat on the bone when it comes to him, and he was recovering from an ACL tear. So again, this is one of those situations where he's not necessarily going for the money. I think he's going for the situation where he can have a big role in the offense, but also still get enough money to where he's carrying himself through to that next chapter in his career, where we know his days are definitely numbered, but it's not something that his production was down last year in any way. It's just a matter of the life cycle, right? Like he's got 2 or 3 probably years left in his career.
But I will say, too, this one feels clean. Like, if we're talking about the Commanders for us in fantasy, Zane, this one feels clean for us where we wouldn't have too big of a ripple or, like, consequences to this because, yes, we're drafting Antonio Williams, but it's not necessarily high. You're putting a lot into Terry McLaurin, but we still think he's going to be the wide receiver one in this offense. So it feels like that's kind of a safe landing spot where we say, okay, even if we've already done our drafts and we're already on Underdog, we're doing redraft, whatever it is, this feels like a good landing spot. Are there any other places that you've heard of for either of these guys? Maybe we include Keenan Allen, where if someone did land there, we'd have to step back and say, oh crap, this really does, take away from someone I've already been drafting.
Yeah, so Deebo's been linked to 2 different teams right now. So one is the Indianapolis Colts, and then the other is the 49ers, coming back and having a reunion with 49ers. And yesterday, it was reported by David Lombardi. He was talking about how George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk have both basically said, hey, Deebo, I've got my outhouse ready for you if you want to stay with us. Like come to our training camp, And I'm doing that kind of sleuthing here, right? Like I'm parking myself outside of Kyle Juszczyk's house nowadays. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm honestly trying to figure out exactly where this guy's going to go because we know that the fantasy implications on players like Keenan Allen and Deebo, it's not necessarily that you want to draft these guys themselves. Maybe depending on how deep your league is, best ball, something like that, you may want to draft the guys. But at the same time, when they end up coming into a wide receiver room, they're going to impact the other receivers in that situation. So You think about if he's joining the team, if a Deebo or a Keenan Allen were to join, let's say the Colts, what does that do to a Josh Downs? How does that impact the amount of targets available for a guy like Tyler Warren? Does it limit their upside? And I do think it does a little bit, right? Like we can't ignore the fact that when you put in a Deebo Samuel, he's a guy that generates a lot of designed targets. So that takes away from other players in the offense.
Pete, are you going to go camp out at Kyle Juszczyk's house to see if he's sitting in the outhouse? I feel like this could be a good series between you two.
No, Zane's already done it. This is the wire.
Okay.
He said, this is my corner. I'm the one that gets to lurk outside of Kyle Juszczyk's house. But no, I think this is another one too. And it's really interesting. We always frame these conversations, redraft versus best ball. Like you're going to get CLV, closing line value, on Deebo and best ball, like especially if he signs with the 49ers. That is a better spot for him. I do think it's a little messy in how this works out. We like Pearsall. We know Evans is going to be a thing there. The Kittle timeline's great. So now you're starting to work through, okay, is DeJon dribbling nothing. They also bring in Christian Kirk, who I think was going to have a pretty significant early season role here as they figure out what they have in Stribling. So this one's a little tougher for me in redraft. It does feel like a spot where it might be really hard to know when to start Deebo, which honestly, that was kind of the case with the Commanders last year too. Exactly. But for best ball purposes, man, you just grab him now because he's going to be 20 spots, 30 spots more expensive if he does return to the Niners.
Let's continue this mystery and unpacking it with Bhayshul, Tuten, and Chris Rodriguez. And Zane, when we look at them, it's really the big question of what the split's actually going to look like. We know Bhayshul Tuten has the edge. He's younger. He's someone that people were calling for last season, and it didn't necessarily happen. So you see two of these guys going at very different ranges in your drafts. Bhayshul Tuten, you're paying a pretty nice price tag, not anything crazy, but a fifth-round price tag for him. Then you've got Rodriguez and the projections here on your screen. What are your expectations with these two, Zane?
Yeah, if I can be a company guy for a minute, I read Dwayne McFarland's article recently, and you guys could probably assume I've probably read everything on the internet so far, right? Like people think I'm literally AI, but I've literally read everything on the internet. I read Dwayne McFarland's article, and he was talking about what league winner running backs look like, right? And so when you think about what a league winner running back looks like, is you need a guy that can do pass catching as well as the rushing work. And that leans itself into a guy like Bhayshul Tuten more than it does Chris Rodriguez. Then you start to unpack some of the things that have come out of Jaguars camp from OTAs. Liam Cohen doesn't want to tip his hand when it comes to what the offense looks like. They don't want to be able to give up, hey, is this a run play or is this a pass play with their personnel? That also leans itself into Bhayshul Tuten. Then you go back to what has happened to Chris Rodriguez. There was this big mystery that was out there. Why is he not at OTAs? Then we come to find out, hey, this guy just had surgery on his foot. And then I've had some somewhat inside information been given to me through the grapevine that it was a Jones fracture. And a Jones fracture is something that's absolutely huge when it comes to nuking fantasy value for people. Mm-hmm. There's so many examples in history of guys like Des Bryant, Sammy Watkins, these types of guys that are explosive athletes that have not been able to gain their previous to injury performance. And so when it comes to that kind of injury, we're talking about potential load management throughout the season. We're talking about potentially limited reps in training camp because they're just trying to get him up to speed. And those are the types of things that open a door for a guy like Bhayshul Tuten to potentially explode. He's one of those guys that I'm absolutely targeting right now. I think that he has the potential to bring back second round value. There's very few backs that are like that are going in this RB 15 plus range. And that's where Tuten is.
Pete, you feel the same way?
Yeah, this one is so tough for me. We've talked about it a little bit on the show. We were talking about how both Tuten and Rodriguez have their place in different builds. I will say I feel more confident that Rodriguez is undervalued than I do Tuten is a smash pick. I certainly see the smash outcomes, the ceiling as Dwayne's laid out, as Zain talked about here, but I do think the price makes it tricky. We're talking about a 70 to 80 pick gap between these two when the team continues to tell us this is going to be a split backfield. These guys are going to have their roles, and that's all before we even talk about the inconvenient truth that could be LaKent Allen in long down and distance situations and stealing some of that pass catching work. So I do want to be careful here. In years past, we have been able to get the Tuten type of bet, the breakout bet at a much more palatable price tag. They're really making us pay up for it this year. I don't necessarily think that's wrong, but I will say, again, going back to the best ball and redraft, I like the Tuten bet a lot more in best ball. You don't have to know when those spike weeks are going to come, those big plays. I think you could have a lot of headaches on your hand with these guys week to week in managed leagues.
Because that was going to be my question is the gap have we gone a little bit too far with the gap when we're looking at those drafts? Because it's a different conversation between redraft and when we're doing those best ball drafts. But to me, when I look at it, if you miss out on Tuten, I don't think Chris Rodriguez is a bad bet at the end. We know that he has familiarity when we're talking about Liam Cohen when they go back to Kentucky. Yes, he got the injury. So Zain, I'll throw that one to you. Like when you look at both of these two, at some point do you look in your analysis and you say, hey, yeah, Bhayshul Tuten is younger. He should have the edge there. But now we've gone a little bit too far. And like Pete said, Chris Rodriguez now is somewhat of a value.
Yeah, it's one of those things. So, a lot of people like to bring up the history with Liam Cohen and Chris Rodriguez, but I kind of lean to the fact that Tuten also has a history with Liam Cohen. It was literally last year. So I think that's also important to think through. They both have 1 year of experience basically with Liam Cohen. And now Tuten has had the most recent experience with Liam Cohen. Then you start to think about, again, I get back to the reps that you're going to see in practice that happen here. It's going to lean itself to the guy that's able to be on the field. We've been promised from Liam Cohen that Chris Rodriguez will be healthy for training camp. We don't know that as a fact just yet. We're going to have to watch and see what ends up happening. I agree that there is a really big gap between the two players in ADP, and that can make it a little bit tougher to want to make that Tuten bet. But at the same time, what you get from Chris Rodriguez and making that investment is a small ADP win potentially, right? Like maybe 2 or 3 rounds of ADP value that brings back like a round 8 or 7 value. But for Bhayshul Tuten, it can be getting an actual league winner, and that's the hard part for me when I'm looking at these two players is thinking about the type of win that I get. And in different scenarios, based on how I'm building my roster, I may need that more steady, hey, Rodriguez, there's going to be some weeks where I can plug him into my lineup. I think they're going to win the game by a lot, and they're going to have a lot of opportunities on the goal line, stuff like that. But Tuten's the one that, man, if I pass on him, the other running backs that are kind of going after him, there's not as many guys that I see having that incredible upside, and that's where I kind of lean between the two right now.
What did you say on SiriusXM today, Zane? You said, because I want to throw it to Pete. Chase Brown, is this a Chase Brown, Zach Moss situation? Pete, is that something that we can look at here with those two?
I saw when Zain. I saw when Zain initially posted that in Zain in the Membrane here. And I loved that comp because I agree the parallels are there, but it goes back to the price thing. When that happened, Chase Brown and Zach Moss were both going around pick 100. It was kind of more analogous price-wise to this Viking situation. And so the market has matured. We have gotten so much better at pricing upside. But again, I agree. If we're going to draft one of these guys in round 2 next year, a la what we've done with Chase Brown now after his breakout, it's clearly Tuten. And so I think there's room for both of these guys. I think my biggest question is Tuten a strong enough bet to really separate from some of the other guys going around him, the Trevion Hendersons, even the Jadarian Prices, obviously Judkins in that range as well, Bucky Irving. I think some of these other high ceiling, low floor players, for me, he's having a hard time separating from those guys as like a clearly better play, but I do see the vision. I think I'm ultimately just going to be a little bit cautious with my exposures, just knowing these prices are pretty high.
Let's go over to, well, actually, let's stay in Jacksonville, huh? Why not? Let's pop up a beast chair and see what we're going to do in Jacksonville with the wide receiver room here, Zane, and your expectations. Because if we can answer this question, this will be so fun because we'll be ahead of the curve. Feels like no one really knows like what's going to happen here when you look at the projections more specifically at fantasylife.com. This wide receiver room is split down the middle. 107 targets for Parker Washington, 98 for Brian Thomas Jr., and then another 100 for Jakobi Meyers. So, Zane, when you're looking at the wide receiver one in Jacksonville, who do you think it's going to be? And then also, how involved is Travis Hunter going to be in this conversation?
I'm pretty much on record here when I talk about this. So some people might not know, but I'm also a film bro at heart. So it's not just the analytics. It's not just sleuthing all the news and camping outside of Kyle Juszczyk's house. It's also watching all the film. And so when I was breaking down the film for the Jaguars, I wrote an article about this team last year. One of the big things that stood out to me was how the team changed Brian Thomas's role when they added Jakobi Meyers to the team. They started pushing him into this vertical X wide receiver role where he's just running basically go routes or things that are deep, right? Like it's probably the most baseline, easiest way to think about it. That is a fundamental part of the Liam Cohen offense, is playing this X wide receiver, kind of like more deeper threat type of role. You think about Mike Evans, you think about guys like Devontae Adams from the McVay offense last year. It's kind of a similar like reference point. And then you think about a guy like Parker Washington, who plays this more slot role that is more of the focal point and more involved in the offense on a week-to-week basis. It's kind of a threading of the needle situation for Brian Thomas. He's more of so given the fact that he's going to be more of a deep threat in this offense, you're probably looking at weeks where you're just not necessarily sure how involved he's going to be. Whereas a guy like Parker Washington, he's going to be more of the underneath intermediate slot receiver role where I could see him being more involved on a week-to-week basis and you feel more comfortable. It doesn't mean that he's going to have the highest boom weeks comparative to the two players. But when you're talking about like a redraft situation, a lot of times you're looking for some baseline consistency. Do I feel like Parker Washington can give me a wide receiver 2 week consistently? Do I feel like he could give me a wide receiver 3 baseline sometimes too? I feel more comfortable with Parker Washington's role in the offense, knowing that he's going to be able to produce that. Liam Cohen, I mean, in 2024 had Chris Godwin was like a top 5 wide receiver before he got injured, playing that same exact slot role. And then Brian Thomas is more of that Mike Evans type of replica where they're going to put him deep. And when Chris Godwin was healthy, Mike Evans wasn't having big weeks. It all happened after Chris Godwin got injured. So that's kind of the situation that I'm seeing here play out. This X wide receiver role for Brian Thomas is absolutely so important and critical to this offense. And I say that it's the most important position on the offense, but it doesn't mean that translates to fantasy production. It's really big for the entire offense in general.
Pete?
Yeah. And I think I like those notes about Brian Thomas, because even though I'm hesitant with both the price for Thomas and Parker Washington, because I do think there's a risk where all of these guys are kind of small misses at cost, and it's really Trevor Lawrence in the run game that are kind of the hits here. I do think Brian Thomas's role is the most defined. He's the one that I don't feel like is going to lose playing time, is going to lose routes. I think as that big body deep threat, like I think he's locked in there. I have problems with Parker Washington, one for just how big of an anomaly he is, as you know, relative to his prospect profile. Dwayne has done some research on how hard it is for this cohort to follow up what they did in previous years. And you look at the comps and they're pretty bad as far as being able to do what they did. You're basically like threading these Hunter Renfrow-esque needles here. That's why I prefer to play it a little cheaper. And I do think there's this duplicative skill set element with Parker Washington, Jacoby, and even Travis Hunter if he was more involved in the offense. And so my fear with Parker Washington, even though he was objectively very good, it's a small sample size, and it also all took place after Travis Hunter was gone for the season. And I worry, like, does it have the backup running back who crushed when the starter was out, but then everything's back together and it's quite not the exact same setup that we got down the stretch with the Jags? And so I do acknowledge there's scenarios, and I'm having to be less stubborn, because it's just day after day of everyone saying Parker Washington is, the next coming of Jerry Rice. But I am still really skeptical at these prices.
Do you comp him to the Michael Wilson situation last year? Is that the same kind of comp for you?
So in that cohort of players, Dwayne included Michael Wilson in that. I mean, I feel way better about Parker Washington's offensive environment. I feel way better about Trevor Lawrence, about the offense. You know, there's some really big issues with the Cardinals, the quarterback play. You look at their win totals, their projected points per game. I mean, this is projected to be a bottom 3 offense in the league. And then you factor in, I think, you could argue Michael Wilson's competition with Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison, and now one of the most exciting rookie running backs in the league who could also catch passes. I would say that's even a steeper hill to climb than what Parker has to beat out for his role.
Zane, what's the best case scenario here in Jacksonville? Is it someone is going to be an alpha wide receiver 1, but it comes at the cost of someone getting injured? Or do you think that there is someone that can come and rise out of these 3 or 4 guys and be the wide receiver 1 for us in fantasy? What's the out?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do think that we're going to see more of a rotation than we want to see until someone gets hurt. And that's kind of where you see the potential for some really big fantasy value, right? So let's just say that a Brian Thomas were to get injured. Are we going to see Travis Hunter step into a full 70% route share role? I don't know if that's the case. Like, I think the team wants to kind of slow play him a little bit. 60%, 50%, something like that. They don't really have any sort of like depth behind those top 3, but they may end up going to more of a 12 personnel, 2 tight ends on the field, 2 wide receivers on the field instead. That's why they invested in the tight end room in the draft in the 2nd round. And then also, I think it was like the 4th or 5th round with Tanner Koziel. So I think that what they would do is kind of alter the way that they run their offense if one of these receivers were to get hurt. And what that does is then prop up the other 2 players that are in like having a full-time role in the offense. And Liam Cohen's talked about how Parker Washington could play on the outside and on the inside. It's not something that's just, hey, we saw a lot of his performance come from the slot receiver role. I think I posted this on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it nowadays as well. But his targets per route run, his yards per route run, everything was actually better on the outside. They were both good numbers in general. And he ran roughly the same amount of routes from the outside and the inside last season. So I think that he has the ability to play in 2 wide receiver sets as well. I agree with you that the small sample size, Pete, is one of those things that I get scared about. I compared it to how I felt about Juwan Jennings last year, where I was like really hot on Juwan Jennings. He had this awesome season in 2024, and then we come into the season last year. Now, see, the funny thing is, any receiver that you bring up from some of those lists, I can come up with like the other side of the argument where it's like, yeah, well, he came into the situation, he was a little banged up, and then something else happened, and then something else happened. Parker Washington stands out a little bit more because he's actually a lot younger than most of those guys when they broke out. He's 23 years old, so he was a young guy coming into the league. I also think that the investment in Parker Washington might actually get harder to might be harder here in the next couple of weeks if they end up signing him to a contract extension, which I've read and heard is likely to end up happening kind of in the somewhere between Jaden Reed and Christian Watson's contracts, which I think would then signal to the market that, hey, this guy's a long-term focal point for us. And in that situation, doesn't the price go up as well? So those are like kind of like my multivariate things that I'm thinking through with the Parker Washington situation. Like, I want to invest now, and then maybe if he goes up another like half round, I'm kind of maybe sitting it out a little bit more.
He's got an interesting ADP here, and I'm on the ADP draft board at fantasylife.com. But like ESPN pick 106, Sleeper 89, Yahoo 106, and then you've got Underdog sitting at 67. So an interesting spot to be in. I think my takeaway too is that if I like all these wide receivers, I definitely want to try and get Trevor Lawrence on my squads when we're talking this deep about this wide receiver room and how excited we are for this offense. Let's see if Jadarian Price is going to be the same way as the Price, right? You see what I did there? Come on here with Jadarian Price. This is the long game. Thank you, Pete. Presented by UNEST. Play the long game for your kid by opening a UNEST investment account today. Zain, I promise I didn't send you checks, not in the mail, but what are your expectations with Jadarian Price on the Seahawks squad with someone like Zach Charbonnet coming off the injury, Kenneth Walker no longer here? What have you been seeing and hearing?
Yeah, so for me, this is one of the hottest button topics that I think that I'm on the other side of the equation than a lot of people are. But the team really does like George Holani, which for everybody talking about, hey, he's UDFA, hasn't really done much in the NFL, but we got a small sample size of him in the playoffs. The team seems to trust him when it comes to pass downs and on pass protection. And we've seen this happen with rookies in the past where the team doesn't necessarily want to throw them into the fray when it comes to pass protections and pass down. And especially for a guy like Jadarian Price, who doesn't have the profile coming out of college where he's had a lot of targets or that he's played much on pass downs. And a lot of that comes back to Jeremiah Love being the stud that he was. But at the same time, needing those reps, trying to get acclimated to the offense, I do think that limits some of his upside because we talk about how much targets can boost a player. Now, then you have to weigh that back to what his ADP is and where he goes in ranges with all of these other players. And I'm kind of on record talking about, Jadarian Price. I haven't necessarily been in on him right now. I think that we're going to probably see a situation where he falls a little bit more, especially in training camp. If we hear, hey, George Holani, just like OTAs, George Holani got the first rep with the first team, which is what happened at OTAs. If that becomes more public knowledge, more visible to the public, that's where I start seeing, hey, Jadarian Price is starting to fall to the range where you see guys like Tony Pollard, Chuba Hubbard are going. And that's where you start pouncing. So it's more of a timing of investment to me right now. Then they also talked about from coming out of Seattle OTAs, talking about Emmanuel Wilson also having a role in this offense, being more of a goal line threat. He's got a bigger body than a guy like Jadarian Price as well. Those are things that take away from the fantasy value. Now we're kind of getting to a point where is Jadarian Price just a between the 20s running back, or does he have that opportunity to get those goal line plays? Does he have an opportunity to potentially lean into getting some more pass catching duties? We haven't even mentioned Zach Charbonnet, which I'll talk about, but I'm curious your guys' thoughts too on this backfield. I know it's hard to see, hey, we got a first round running back and he's going in round 6 or 7 or something like that. Like how do you guys feel about it?
Yeah, it's honestly kind of similar to the Tuten scenario where I can't poke holes in the ceiling case, right? Like it's not that crazy to say they bring him in to do what Kenneth Walker did for him down the stretch. He's this big play runner. You get this really, well-oiled system and they don't miss a beat from their Super Bowl run. I can see that. But I do think there's a lot of ways for him to get squeezed. And it's this concept of getting squeezed in both directions. The George Holani drumbeat is pretty loud. I do think he is going to be a factor early in the season. And then you have the specter of late season Zach Charbonnet. And this team trusts Zach Charbonnet, right? Like they are going to use him in third down situations. They like him at the goal line. This is the veteran back they will rely on once he's fully healthy. And so I'm like, where does that leave Jadarian Price? A lot of times with these rookies, it's like you just beat out the incumbent. We talk about Jonathan Brooks versus Chuba. Chuba's going to be the guy to start there, but can Jonathan Brooks pick up steam and kind of surpass him as the season progresses? It's a harder thesis if it's like, first you need to pass George Halani, get up to speed, and then guess what? Bam! This guy who is a high-value touch monster in Zach Charbonnet gets injected into the offense right when we need the bell cow role the most from our running backs as we enter the fantasy playoffs. So again, not to belabor the redraft versus best ball thing, I'm taking my stabs on him in best ball. I think the price is right, early 6th round, mid 6th round. Redraft is tough because it's like, can't start him at the beginning of the season because Holani's, getting all this work. And then late season Sharps is back and I don't know where to start him. So I do find his price a lot more tricky in redraft than I do best ball.
So you wouldn't be comfortable with him as your RB2 if we're talking redraft there?
No, I wouldn't. I think
Okay.
if you were forced to start Jadarian Price week 1, I think you probably, when you flip over the projections, whether it's in our guillotine leagues or ESPN's projection, your opponent's Kyron Williams is going to be projecting for 13.6 half-point PPR points, and Jadarian Price is going to be projecting for 7.8. That's my back of the back. Nah, the ceiling would be there. Do you rip off the big play? But base projection, you'd be sacrificing a lot.
And I think, Zain, that's the tough part with, when I look at this, as a Seahawks, I put my Seahawks fandom to the side and I'm like, this team needs to establish the run. There's no way around it. Even with Fleury coming in as their new offensive coordinator, what works with someone like Sam Darnold is making sure that you can take pressure off. And I think that's something that I pay attention to on the positive side with someone like Jadarian Price, where you say, hey, they can't get away from that. As much as I love Rashid Shaheed and everyone else, and I think they are going to have a bigger role, what works well with Sam Darnold is making sure that they're pounding the ball on the ground and getting them into good situations. So to me, I think Jadarian Price is a much more talented running back than someone like George Halani, someone like Emmanuel Wilson. But then, like you and Pete were just saying, you get him into the situations where maybe he can be squeezed and maybe he's not going to be utilized like we want. And you're looking at the price tag and saying, okay, yikes. I've been drafting him. I will say that because I just think that it's going to lead to great game scripts for him when they're looking at him on the ground. But there is a chance that Zach Charbonnet comes back, they go back to a 1A, 1B situation, and you're sitting back there and saying, dang, this isn't what I wanted.
Yeah, you have to caveat when you're taking these guys, right? So like I said, if you wait 2 weeks and George Halani gets the first rep with the first team, you're going to see this ADP drop even further. And when that's the case, that's when you say, hey, this is the time to buy, right? So we saw early draft season that Jadarian Price was starting to get steamed up. If you drafted on the first couple of days of Best Ball Mania or something, you're able to get a good price. And then it started getting steamed up a little bit too high. And now it's starting to fall again because of all the drumbeat on George Halani and the fact that Zach Charbonnet might be back for November, December, the time when you actually need these guys the most when you're in your fantasy playoffs. So that's the reason why I'm pretty confident that I think that the first couple of snaps that come out of training camp, we're going to hear, hey, George Halani was splitting first team reps, and then everyone's going to be scared, and that's the time you want to buy these players.
So then on the other side, Pete, I guess we can look at it from a best ball perspective. You're taking Halani at the end of those drafts. You're taking Charbonnet. You're taking Emmanuel Wilson.
I'm not taking Charbonnet, and I am taking Halani. In fact, I did 4 drafts this morning on stream, and I believe Halani was on 3 of them, for sure 2 of them. I think he fits in a lot of builds. And you know what? I actually did one team that was a Price and Halani together because I think there could be this passing of the baton element to those guys. I think the Sharp stuff is really tricky. He's, Halani's free. You can get him in the 18th round whenever you want. Zach Charbonnet, you got to pay up, pick 140, 150, depending on the draft. But one of the things I like about Halani is this idea of momentum, right? I think he's going to have that early season role. What if he's good? What if Jadarian Price struggles to earn the coach's trust? We saw that with Trevion Henderson. Trevion Henderson can be the most explosive guy in the world, takes his first touch in the preseason, 80 yards to the house on a kick return. And if you don't earn the coach's trust, you're not going to play. It really seems like the team trusts Halani. And you mentioned Emmanuel Wilson. This is another kind of consummate veteran who could, eat into that early stuff. I think all signs point to a committee to start the season, but I like Halani's blend of, familiarity with the system. They've shown a willingness to use him at the goal line, even in the playoff stretch when they had Sharbs and Walker there. So yeah, I think he has a role on teams, and I think he's probably a good redraft target if you're in a 0 RB team. Take a guy like Kamara, take a Halani, these guys that can give you a little early season production until, the rest of your team is caught up to speed.
This has been the long game here presented by UNES, the easiest way to open a flexible tax advantage investment account for your kid. Play the long game, set up an account for your kid in under 10 minutes at unes.co. That's UNEST.co. All right, a lot can change in 5 years. The price of your internet will not with Xfinity's 5-year price guarantee. Sports are unpredictable. Your internet price shouldn't be. Get that reliable price for a reliable connection. Lock in 5 years of predictability. 5 years, the same price, no contracts or commitments, because a lot can change in 5 years. Travis Kelce is married. Rashid Shaheed, maybe he's the league winner we all need. But no matter what changes in those 5 years, the price of your internet will stay the same. Learn more at Xfinity.com. Restrictions apply. Select plans only. Continuing on with the biggest training camp mysteries here presented by Hims, and we're like scoping out Kyle Juszczyk's house. We're figuring out if George Halani, someone needs to go see him at like the Dick's Diners Drive-Ins or whatever in Seattle, figure out what's happening with him. Zain, when we look at someone in the Commanders backfield for fantasy football, like what do we do? What are we doing here? I love Rachaad White, but at some point, do I just have to stop drafting him because it's not going to be good for fantasy? How are you looking at this backfield?
Yeah, so this is one of those things where you try to find love in like the ugliest places, right? Like this is one of those situations where nobody really likes to think about Rachaad White and Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt that much. Like nobody's excited about either of these players, but we've seen this offense look good with Jayden Daniels at the helm before. So naturally you want to invest in this backfield because there is significant upside if you happen to hit on the right one, right? Both of them are going in a really reasonable range at the moment. You're talking about players that are in like the 120-ish range on Underdog. Yeah, so the feedback out of training camp has basically been, one, Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt missed some time. Rachaad White was the training camp kind of like MVP, if you will, from the running back room. People said that he looked good, but a lot of it was coming back to the pass catching elements of his game, right? And we think about what Jayden Daniels does from a quarterback perspective and how quarterbacks typically, especially as runners, guys that can get like 500 plus rushing yards, do they really check it down to running backs that often? I know we saw what Austin Eckler looked like. I think his targets per route run was something like, 0.2-ish in his time with Jayden Daniels. But I am thinking through this in multiple ways, right? So they add Chigakonkwo. If they do add Stefon Diggs, what does having that whole like profile of Terry McLaurin, Stefon Diggs, and Chigakonkwo, how much does that really leave for a running back when it comes to pass catching? And then I start thinking about the profiles of these two guys, right? So the feedback at a training camp for Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt, the most interesting man in the world, which everyone loves calling him Bill, is we want to see this guy come into the backfield and be able to showcase that he can be a pass catcher. Now, we haven't seen it in his profile in the past, really, right? So last year wasn't much of a pass catcher. Even in college, didn't do too much of the pass catching type of duties. But all of the feedback has been this guy is different than Rachaad White when it comes to running the ball. We, very similarly to what Liam Cohen said about his backfield, doesn't want to tip his hand when it comes to personnel and who's in the game. So having a guy like Rachaad White, you kind of lean towards, hey, maybe we're going to throw the ball. What they want to do is they would love for Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt to take the next step when it comes to, one, pass protection, and two, pass catching, so that they can implement him into kind of more of a full featured role as opposed to just being segmented into just running the ball, and then tipping their hand when it comes to run pass splits between the two running backs. So for me, the biggest upside ends up actually being Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt, because again, it comes back to every single report saying, hey, this guy is the one that looks better in the run game. We want to see what he can do in the pass game. Let's see if he can develop that opportunity. And if he can, then he could have both. Whereas I think when Rachaad White takes over the backfield, I don't think that you're going to see him get both fully. You may see a guy who gets 5 targets in a game and 5 rushes, but you may not see 10 rushes and 5 targets. That's something that I could see more happening with Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt. I typically actually in history have leaned towards the pass catching back. I've kind of changed my perspective, and this is kind of where I'm leaning more Bill than Rachaad White.
But if you like the pass catching roles, wouldn't it be Rachaad White? Because last year the marks for JCM wasn't like they weren't good. And it's small. I mean, their offensive line was like 26 last season, right, for the Commanders. So that wasn't good. But like 3% target shares, 9% targets per route run. Do you think Jacory Krosky-Merritt has the ability to get the pass catching work? Or no?
I think that he has the opportunity to. They want him to develop into that. So they're going to give him every chance in training camp to show that he can do it. Whether he can do it or not is really just up to whether he's developed that skill set over the course of the past year. Then I start thinking about the price, though. We tend to like lean into, hey, you need the pass catching guy, but at these prices, it doesn't actually matter as much if you get the guy that does like the goal line work and the guy that gets like the between the 20s work in terms of rushing the ball, and they do it relatively efficiently. You could still get some decent value out of Jacory Krosky-Merritt being in like the 120s right now. And so that's the other reason why I kind of lean into it and say, you know what? I'm okay with not getting like the pass catcher in a Jayden Daniels led offense if they end up having a Diggs, who I feel decently good about going to the Commanders, and then they added Chig. So I'm actually okay with the Jacory Krosky-Merritt price right now.
Pete, what about you?
I feel like we're good cop, bad cop, and I'm like the negative Nancy Drew, trying to stay on theme here with all of these guys. I haven't been taking Bill right now. I do find his price to be tricky, to say the same phrase over and over again. Like, he's going ahead of Chris Rodriguez. I think I'm getting more and more excited about some of the upside scenarios for Keaton Mitchell. I guess my issue with Bill is you do need a detective to sift through all of the potential suspects here, because we're dealing with Kaytron Allen, Jeremy McNichols, Jerome Ford is here. And when you look at the draft capital specifically spent on Kaytron Allen and Bill, I think it's a negligible difference. I think we're heading to a camp battle here. And I will pay attention. I'll be having notifications on for Zain to see how this plays out. But I do worry that this is still up in the air. Who's going to get that base work with Rachaad White's role really assured here? And in the same way Bill rocketed up draft boards last year when they traded Brian Robinson, I think there's a lot of room for the market to either get confident in Kaytron Allen or get really scared about Bill, because we get the Holani version in Washington. Jeremy McNichols is splitting, first team reps, Jerome Ford, whatever it is. Yeah. So I just see a lot of ways this goes south for Bill from a value perspective. Again, I certainly see the ceiling being the wingman to Jayden Daniels in this offense, but I do worry that his lock on this spot isn't as assured as we want, especially after they moved on from Brian Robinson last year, and it was like, all right, it's Bill time, let's go. And then they're like, nope, Chris Rodriguez is actually going to be our guy here. So yeah, it's a tricky one for me, but man, I do want to be invested in the Commanders offense.
Rachaad White projected for 98 rush attempts, 392 yards, but the passing down works, 44 targets, 37 receptions, 270 receiving yards compared to 14 targets for Jacory Krosky-Merritt. And like you said, Zain, it can all change when training camp comes up, and we'll be watching that very closely, just like we probably will for maybe Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason. I don't know how much, Zain, we have to look at training camp, but it's the question of, okay, these guys, I don't know if they burned us last season, but the thought was that, okay, if you get Jordan Mason, inevitably, you never want things to happen, but Aaron Jones was another year older and he did go down with injury. So you thought to yourself, great, Jordan Mason's going to be able to take over. Again, didn't necessarily do that enough for the, what the fantasy football community wanted. What are your expectations with both of those guys this year? Are you back in?
Yeah, this is another situation where I think about players who get kind of like that post-hype situation, right? So I'm thinking about Jordan Mason, and everybody was out on a guy like Javonte Williams last year. I was out on Javonte Williams last year. I was like, hey, this guy looked toast. Like, he just didn't look good anymore. And that's the best way to find value in fantasy that I've found historically, is when everyone's out on a guy that has a decent shot at a good role. That's when you should be in. His price right now is very cheap for a guy that could be in what I consider a pretty solid offense, as long as Kyler Murray plays adequate quarterbacking. And all the reports out of Vikings camp are that they want Jordan Mason to at least play that kind of like lead back, early down grinder role. And again, it comes back to similar things that I just said about Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. Let's say that Jordan Mason only has that role, doesn't do anything in the pass game. It's still an okay bet to make that at like a 120 price, right? Like that's totally fine to get a guy that's going to go score a bunch of touchdowns over the course of the season. And then on top of that, we talk about a scheme change that they're doing for the Vikings running game as well. One, they want to lean heavier on the run this year. Two, they want to implement more of the Mike Shanahan and Mike McDaniel style running scheme this season. Historically, they've been doing more, kind of between the guard and the guard and tackle type of runs, and now they want to do more outside stuff, which I know sounds more like a profile that a guy like Aaron Jones would fit because he's more of a quicker style running back. But the scheme itself lends itself to more big plays. I did a big research project on this. Anytime you're running outside the tackles, you're going to have bigger explosive plays, regardless if you're a big back or a small back, it doesn't matter. And so if they're doing that and they've added a guy like Juwan Jennings who adds like an adequate blocker in the run game, you're starting to see the pieces come together around maybe this rushing attack might change a little bit. Maybe this rushing attack could look better year over year. And I think it helps to just have more, have like a decent quarterback playing, and a guy like Kyler Murray who can also draw the defense's attention with his legs, and people have to think about that extra threat. So when I'm making the investment here, I know I know, Pete, you just talked about how you would rather invest in kind of like that pass catcher type of player like Rachaad White. I'm leaning back into the running back type of player, the one that doesn't necessarily have all of the receiving value in Jordan Mason, because I do think that he's the guy that's probably more likely to get a bulk of the rushes and then also have the high value touchdown upside.
Yeah, I wrote about this backfield in the newsletter the other day. I think it was when Zain circulated, one of those quotes about, Mason perhaps being in the pole position here. But I've kind of basically now taken the approach that I think the price is right on both of these guys. ADP 115 on Underdog for Mason, 120 for Aaron Jones. It's kind of rare for us to get a few of these factors coming together at once, which is an offense that I expect to really take a leap. I was doing a show today with Mark Dank from Establish the Run. He referenced last year, the Vikings had only 9 carries inside the 10-yard line with just kind of all of the tomfoolery they had going on at quarterback. They should be much, much improved in that regard. For instance, Javonte Williams on the Cowboys had 16 carries inside the 10 last year. And that's kind of been my comp for of like, was I excited about Javonte last year? No. And I waived him despite liking the offense and Dak and George Pickens. I was in on all those guys, but I'm like, I don't want to touch Javonte. I don't want to make the same mistake with these backs. I think there's going to be a lot of goal line opportunities for both of them. And I think they both can do it. And there's scenarios where it's 10, goal line carries for Jordan Mason, 6 for Aaron Jones. At these prices, both can get there. I think their roles are slightly different in that they're not like, cannibalizing each other necessarily, or one's a 0 while the other's scoring 16 points a game. I think they can both pay off ADPs at this cost. And then if one of them does get hurt, the other's going to project as like a top 12 weekly value. And so I think there's a lot of ways to win with this offense, betting on KOC, betting on Kyler, betting on more goal line opportunities. I'm clicking both of these guys when I get a chance.
I agree. And I've come back around to it, Zain, because it was one of those situations where I just said, I don't want either of these guys. They stink. And it just didn't work for me last year. But when you have guys that are getting picked outside the top 100 on almost every single platform, Sleeper, ESPN, Yahoo, I'm looking at Underdog, RT Sports is a little bit closer, but it makes you have to look around and say, okay, I don't want to be biased from last season. It's what have you done for me lately? But even last year, when you look at this offensive line, like it was a terrible season for the Vikings in general with poor quarterback play, but you had, their left tackle miss 7 games. You had Ryan Kelly miss 9. Donovan Jackson missed 3 games. Brian O'Neill. We can keep going down the list. And even considering all of that, Mason still averaged 47 rushing yards per game, 4.8 yards per carry, 13.8 explosive rate. So it's pretty good considering everything that went wrong for that team. So I agree with both of you guys, and I'm back in on these players at their prices. Let's go to the last one here, Zain, and talk about Jaylen Warren, Rico Dowdle. What the split's going to look like in Pittsburgh and who you've been drafting more of right now.
So I can't give up my source on this, but I do have some good information on how this running back backfield is going to run. The Steelers are likely going to lean into Rico Dowdle playing more of that early down role this season. Kind of more similar to what Jaylen Warren did last year, and being more of that goal line threat as well, with Jaylen Warren kind of taking on more of the Kenneth Williams type, or sorry, Kenneth Gainwell type of role this season. So the third down pass catching role. Then we could see this kind of play out in a situation where either one could earn a little bit more opportunity in either direction, right? So if Rico Dowdle struggles a little bit, are there situations where Jaylen Warren could step up and take a little bit more rushing work? Yes, that's definitely in the cards. Oppositely, if Jaylen Warren proves to just not be able to step into that role just as Kenneth Gainwell did last year, which we've kind of seen him in this role before too. It's not like it would be out of the realm of possibilities for him to do well in this role, but if something struggles there too, like let's say he gets nicked up and then they don't want to limit his touches, we could see Rico Dowdle take on more of the work as well. So my investment here, like they're both pretty much going right next to each other. I do think you get the touchdown upside with Dowdle, and then you get the Kenneth Gainwell like PPR scam type of situation with Warren. The price honestly feels right between the two, where it's like yin or yang, like which guy do you think is going to hit this week versus the other? I feel honestly fine with taking either. I wouldn't want either of them to be my RB2 on a team. Like these are situations where I'm looking at like RB3 at the best, and then, you know, maybe an RB4 situation if I decided to invest early in the running back room. But there are scenarios where, you know, if you do see a guy like Jaylen Warren truly take on that Kenneth Gainwell role, and let's just say a guy like Michael Pittman doesn't take as many targets away from that running back, do you see a scenario where you're starting at Jaylen Warren on a weekly basis in a half PPR league? Yeah, I could see that, because that was a very like prominent role that Kenneth Gainwell ended up having at the end of the season. Like we're talking about a guy that got upwards of 100 targets last year. That's hard to accomplish at the running back position. So I do see there being a little bit more potential upside with Jaylen Warren, but the prices are roughly the same, and I could see it going either way, honestly. And that's just the way that the roles come out at the beginning, right? We know that teams change their mind as the course of the season. I said that both of them have the opportunity to take on more depending on what happens with the other. So right now I'm kind of leaning, I don't know the answer, and I'm just kind of taking either one depending on who's available to me.
Yeah, I'm in lockstep with Zain here. I think both have appeal, and it is one of those situations where I'm kind of just shrugging my shoulders and taking nibbles of both. There is an element to the Jaylen Warren thing where I'm always like, are we kind of wish casting here? Like every year we're like, just let this guy have the Austin Eckler glow up where he gets to be the full bell cow, because I think there's a lot of comparables to kind of their skill set. And then it's like, nope, there's always going to be a Najee Harris here.
No.
You know, and guess what? Even when there isn't a Najee Harris and Caleb Johnson is a flop, there's a Kenny Gainwell there. And now we have another Najee Harris with Rico Dowdle. But I will say just one other kind of interesting nugget. Dwayne's been doing some macro research on, you know, what is the most predictive thing for fantasy scoring each year. And one of them is just previous season fantasy points. I know it sounds so simple, but two players who are undervalued in how they finished last year relative to their ADP, it's both Rico Dowdle and Jaylen Warren. Like they're both going 10 and 9 spots lower than they would be positionally if we were just sorting by how they did last year. So I think they're both values. I am kind of intrigued in the Steelers offense this year. I think they can be better. I think Pittman will be a nice addition. I'm not going to fight you either way if you feel strongly on one over the other.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. Mid-range RB3 with upside is kind of how I look at them. And like you said, Pete, we will never get the Jaylen Warren seasons. Or maybe it's going to be the year that we finally say it's not happening, and then all of a sudden it finally happens. So that's what you can look at with Pittsburgh. Zain, before we let you go, we have to put you in the hot seat here. We have a few rapid-fire questions for you, so we're going to head to the hot seat now. See that graphic? Are you ready to go, Zain? We're at the hot seat. It's going to be fun. Rapid fire questions. You ready?
I'm sweating already. Let's do it.
All right. I want to know your scariest fade for the 2026 fantasy football season.
Ooh, okay. I think it's Brian Thomas Jr. actually. And really? I'm fading him, and I feel terribly about it because of what he did as a rookie, right? Like a first round pick coming out, like it's so hard to say, hey, this guy got 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns, and I'm just not going to, I don't want to reinvest in that at a decently cheap price for what he had done his rookie year. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's a guy that I don't feel great about the role. I don't like the deep threat thing. It's not like I wrote a whole article about how guys that run shorter routes generally produce better in fantasy, and he just doesn't have that to his profile right now. So I'm scared of him.
What about a player who will make or break your fantasy season this year? Maybe this is a guy you've drafted a ton on Underdog so far.
It's Jaylen Waddle. I feel so good about this situation. Like to the fact that like feeling this certain about a singular player scares the crap out of me.
Yeah.
Like I've never felt this way, but we talk about a guy who used to be going in round 2 of fantasy drafts. Now we put him in a situation where he's joining an offense that threw the ball the most last season. They're planning on playing with a higher tempo. They may not throw the ball as much in terms of percentage of pass plays, but they are projected to have more plays this year over year. And now you're saying this guy is the best receiver on the team. Every single metric that I look at says, hey, Jaylen Waddle is actually an elite talent when it comes to separation. And now I'm thinking about, hey, this team is leaning into the skill set of what a Jaylen Waddle does. He's a great route runner. He's great at screen passes. He has incredible yak skills. That's exactly what this offense operates on. He was going kind of in the early 5th round. He's steamed up a little bit to mid 4th round in Underdog. I keep talking myself into the situation where I'm like, hey, would I rather have him or would I have Chris Olave? And then I talk myself back into Jaylen Waddle. Like every single time I do a 1v1 comparison and I go back to Jaylen Waddle. So he's the one that I'm most scared about flopping.
All right. Well, if you could know one player's final stat line for 2026, can't be Jaylen Waddle, or maybe that is your answer, but if you could know one player's final stat line for 2026, who would you pick?
Oh, man. Does it not have to be like we already talked about Brian Thomas, but it has to be someone in the Jaguars wide receiver room. Like that is the biggest enigma of figuring out what the route share splits are between all 3 or 4 of the guys that are in there. So you could say like, hey, is it just knowing whether Travis Hunter plays enough on offense this season?
Yeah.
Is it just knowing that Brian Thomas is playing a full route share role? Like just knowing that entire wide receiver room situation, I think unlocks the key to fantasy because it gives you the upside in so many different scenarios. We talked about best ball. Like in a best ball scenario is a perfect way to invest in this offense because you don't have to pick when a player goes off. But when you look at the end of the season and you say, hey, in week 15, 16, and 17, when I need the biggest booms, I guarantee you one of those receivers is going to be a receiver that you need in one of those weeks. It could be a different receiver every single week.
Yeah.
But those are the stat lines that you need to know. And I'm so scared about that entire situation that I get it wrong. But I feel again, I said I'm fading Brian Thomas and I'm leaning into Parker Washington. So that's my take.
It's a good one.
I love I was just going to say, I think like Parker Washington, because you want to pick one where it gives you a ton of information about the other guys. And Parker Washington can tell you information about Jacoby. It can tell you information about Travis Hunter and the overall success of the offense. I love that one. Jadarian Price would be another good one too, if you wanted to go with a running back.
Yeah.
One more for you here from me, Zane. Which structural drafting strategy do you think will be all the rage after 2026, the hot trend everyone's going to be chasing next year?
I think it's a hero running back strategy. I think we've gone a little bit too far in the pendulum of kind of like doubling up on these running backs and starting to lean back into that kind of like more like robust build. And a lot of it comes back to, hey, these running backs have stayed healthy. And some of it is the fact that it's truly, some of it is dedicated back to how offenses are actually running their schemes and how defenses are countering that. And I think we're going to start to see that pendulum swing back with teams leaning into 12 and 13 personnel, more linebackers on the field. Linebackers are bigger. Linebackers can hurt players more easily than a DB can. I think we're going to see some running back injuries this year from some of the top players. Guys like Jonathan Taylor, guys like Christian McCaffrey. Like those are some of the things that I think we're going to maybe end up seeing. And then people are going to get scared of drafting running backs again. And you're going to see people lean into kind of, hey, I'm just going to take one in the first like 2, 3, 4 rounds, and then go back into the direction of, well, I got a really good value in Bhayshul Tuten in round 5, or I got a really good value of Jadarian Price in round 6, or Chuba in round 7, or Ramondre in round 7. And that you can build a really nice team through that profile and still get wide receiver 1 upside in round 2 and 3. And that's the way that everyone's going to start leaning back into. And I honestly think that is my meta take is that that's probably the right way to build, because it allows you to be very flexible in drafts. And that's the way that I like to build all the time too.
All right, Zain. Well, you got through the hot seat perfectly there, so we appreciate you doing that with us, and we so appreciate you hanging out with us. Again, you guys can find Zain Dhanani over there on X at Dhanani Zain. First time, Zain, but definitely will not be the last. We're excited to be chopping it up with you this offseason and throughout the regular season. For Peter Overzet, myself, Kendall Valenzuela as well, go to fantasylife.com. Check out all of Zain's great work and all of our great work at Fantasy Life, and we will see you here next time.